By the beginning of the Christian era, Rome's focus on gravitas or seriousness of purpose fell by the wayside. Um, their preferences became a little more harsh, almost as your text describes it, bloodthirsty. This was a time, remember, when Christians were persecuted. And um, not to exaggerate the point, but we know that public executions of Christians, throwing them to the lions, was something that historically we have heard of. This was also a time when the playwright Seneca, if you remember, we talked about the three Roman playwrights, Plautus, Terence, and Seneca. Seneca was the one that gave us tragedies. His plays were performed. As we said, they were dark, they were bloody, and for a time, this was the period that they were popular. The Romans always, remember, were interested in entertainment, variety entertainment, and full-length plays were not that. Um, what became popular during this time were short comic plays called mimes. And in these mimes, males played males, females played females. The situations were amusing, very funny, and enjoyable. This, of course, responding to the Romans' desire for some sort of variety entertainment. By 476 AD, the Roman Empire fell, and theater for a couple of centuries was not practiced in the way that we have become familiar with. There were small bands of itinerant performers that traveled around and performed on the street, responded to the desire for entertainment, some sort of performing entertainment. Um, Also, in some cases, theater companies were formed, and the company would be hired by wealthy individuals to perform for them. So theater still existed. It was still around. It just was not performed in the way that we had seen over the last several centuries. Um, we are entering a period now uh, where war ravages most of the area. Uh, Starvation, disease. It is a very difficult time. We are entering what is known as the Middle Ages or the medieval period. Um, we can look at the Middle Ages in terms of time in three phases. The early phase is from 900 to 1050. The high phase is from 1050 to 1300. And the late phase is from 1300 to 1500. Now, the Middle Ages were also referred to as the Dark Ages, and that was because the majority of the people could not read. The learning was taught, was gained through the church, and it was very important for the church. The leaders of the church recognized the need to educate the uneducated, specifically about Christianity. So the church took on the challenge of educating these uneducated people about God. During the first two phases of the Middle Ages, from 900 AD to 1300 AD, theater was performed in churches and monasteries. It was incorporated into the service, uh, and these plays were referred to as liturgical drama, these dramatizations of stories from the Bible. They were performed by clergymen, choir boys. They were in Latin and they were sung or chanted. The earliest recorded um, liturgical drama dates back to 976 AD, and it is called Chem Charites, and it tells the story of the arrival of the women at the tomb of Christ, finding that the stone is rolled away and Christ is no longer there. And they ask, or they encounter the angel who asks them, "Whom do you seek?" And they, of course, say, "We seek Jesus." And he lets them know what has happened, that Jesus has risen from the dead. Um, whom do you seek is the translation of the title of the play. En Charites, whom do you seek? Liturgical dramas were performed throughout this period. And of course, this wasn't the only one. And these liturgical dramas were performed on feast days, religious holidays on the Christian calendar. The effort to educate people about Christianity through these celebrations, through these um, days of worship, was a good idea. Unfortunately, not everyone understood Latin, and not everyone felt comfortable coming into a church. So the mission wasn't being realized. Uh, by the third phase, or the late phase of the Middle Ages, theater moved outside of the church, and the language that the theater was performed in was the language that the people spoke, or vernacular. This theater outside of church in the language of the people is called vernacular religious drama. To coincide with this movement of theater outside of the church, the church leaders, religious leaders, wanted to support the effort and to partner with the lay community in spreading the word of God and educating people about Christianity. Um, to commemorate this joining of these two groups, a festival was started called the Feast of Corpus Christi. It was a celebration of the redemptive power of the body and blood of Christ. And it was celebrated by a procession, or with a procession through the city. Um, and this procession brought together clergy members and members of the community, lay people. And the whole processional nature of this festival um, established a way to present these vernacular religious dramas. Theater, to bring theater to the people, which was the goal of this effort, theater was mounted on the backs of wagons, and these wagons would travel along a route through town, and they would stop and perform where the people were gathered. And they would mount these, what were stories from the Bible, dramatized on the backs of these wagons. The flatbed of the wagon, of course, served as the stage. That was called the platea. And they would attach a screen or a backdrop to one side of the wagon. And on that backdrop was painted an image, the side of the mountain, the ocean, the desert, the Garden of Eden, whatever the story called for. And they were performed on that wagon. And they would perform, and then they would move on, and another wagon would come behind them. This was a big event. Um, People attended, they took off work so they could go and witness these plays. Now, they took the stories from the Bible and dramatized them, and they performed them in what were known as cycles, sections of the Bible performed in one season, if you will. They couldn't perform certainly all of the stories from the Bible during that one festival week. So they performed them in cycles, and there were various collections of these cycle plays. This, of course, is uh, throughout uh, England for the most part. Performing these cycle plays was a way of achieving their goal, achieving the objective. People gathered there to watch the plays. And what a better way to give or to share information uh, uh, than to share it through theater. The impact that the play made was important. Um, People needed to understand these stories through movement, through practices that audiences came to recognize and understand. For example, the way the medieval stage addressed time was very important. First of all, if a character is standing on the stage, they are in real time, they are on Earth. The offstage represented the eternal realm and the stage right and stage left, depending on how the story was structured or told, represented heaven and hell. Also, in terms of characters, the actors were common people. It was a community sponsored event, these plays, and members of the community took part in the presentation of these plays. At that time, the guild system was emerging and very successful and powerful. With a guild, you have a business, and at the head of the business, you have a master who owns the business. Say this master owns a bakery. He is a baker. Uh, and this bakery grows in popularity with customers, and the master hires journeymen. These are experienced bakers to come in and produce the goods, produce the bread, etc. Under these journeymen, you had young men who wanted to learn this skill. They, of course, were apprentices. So, this guild structure of master, owner of the business, journeymen, the laborers, the skilled workers, and apprentices, young men wanting to learn the craft, learn this skill, provided a business structure. It's very important at this time during the Middle Ages because it provided some sense of organization, within the city. Eventually, cities grew around these guilds, making the guild more successful, more powerful, etc. And this happened all over Western Europe. So it was important for these guilds, as they are serving the community and very active in community activities, to participate in these cycle plays. And they took on the challenge of becoming a part of it, staging the plays. If their guild, for example, was one that, excuse me, um, um, made or produced um, boats or fishing nets or anything related to fishing or the water, they might take on the challenge of doing, for example, Noah's Ark, if they were to tell a story about something that went on the ocean. That would be the responsibility of that particular guild. The visitation of the Magi at the birth of Christ with their gold and gifts of brightly colored whatever could have been handled or taken on by the blacksmith or somebody who worked with fine metals, etc. And their guild would take it on. But the performers were all common people. They were not actors. They were not theater people. Their satisfaction, because they, of course, they weren't compensated, their satisfaction came from participating in these plays and serving the purpose of educating people about Christianity. In terms of costumes, they wore their regular clothes, unless, of course, they portrayed a saint, and they would then um, wear something that represented that particular character. For example, if the story involved St. Peter would have keys that represented the keys to the kingdom of heaven. God, of course, wore church garments and was dressed probably in white. Angels had wings. The most terrifying costume, of course, belonged to the devil, and it was red. It had a tail, and he had a tail and horns and carried a pitchfork. The visual impact, as you can imagine, was important. Spectacle was very important. Um, this continued um, for the period of the late phase of the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, this was Christian drama. Not everyone was Christian. It was open and anyone could attend. And inevitably, there were, as you can imagine, mixes of cultures within the crowds gathered to see these Christian plays, telling of these Christian stories. And unfortunately, conflict erupted, fights broke out, people lost their lives, and it became tragic because this was intended to be something very supportive, very positive, something that everyone could attend and participate in, and hopefully leave with a sense of enjoyment and experience. Unfortunately, because of the violence that erupted during these performances, the popularity of these cycle plays declined rapidly. Um, it was just unsafe. As these plays declined in popularity, something had to come in to replace them. The type of theater that came in after the cycle play were plays that were not um, religious in nature. One type of play that bridged that gap was the morality play. Um, Rather than telling a story that was specifically associated with a book of the Bible or a story from the Bible, at the center of the morality play is a character that is universal. That character represents all of us in our humanity, our weaknesses, our strengths, our successes, our failures, our shortcomings, and our um, desire to live a good life to ensure that in the hereafter we will be in heaven rather than in hell. Such a play is a play called Every Man. And from the title, you gather that this character, this title character, represents all of us. Every man lived his life without much consideration of his behavior, living a godly life the way God intended. And he comes to what is going to be the end of his life. And as death approaches him, every man is unsure of where he is going to wind up. Um, so he tries to find his friends, these people that he spent most of his life with, to speak for him, to represent him, and they all decline, um, except one. And that one character represents good deeds. And good deeds steps up and speaks for every man, talking about during his life, he was able to serve others, he performed good deeds. This is enough to ensure his place in the kingdom of heaven. Now, it's important to mention that with morality plays, the use of allegory is very important. In a story like Every Man, you have characters who represent human qualities. Um, Not specifically in Every Man, but consider that there could be a character who represents envy or greed or lust or another of a human quality that um, kindness, generosity, uh, um, good deeds, for example. These characters are, or these qualities are represented by characters and they interact with the other characters, um, um, demonstrating their specific quality. And this made, for example, Every Man a successful story. In addition to morality plays, you have farce, which is short comic plays, really written and performed to entertain. You also have pantomime, which, unlike the pantomime that we are accustomed to today, is connected to a story that is also comedic, lighthearted, and appeals to a large number of people. This bridging the gap between the end of the cycle play and what comes next. Um, Also, one major development during this late phase or the late phase of the Middle Ages was that theater was about to become a profession. Um, at this time, wealthy individuals were able to hire theater companies, acting companies, to come in and perform for them. They would contract with the company, and the company, in some cases, would write the play specifically for the event, rehearse the play, perform the play, probably set up their own stage, provide all of the costumes, the makeup. They would literally bring the show to the event. They would perform, and for this performance and all the work associated with it, they would be compensated. Contracts and compensation, all of it coming toward the end of the late phase of the Middle Ages. What comes next is the Renaissance. And during this time, we see theater emerging as a true profession.